Hello, I'm Ed Raby, and this is Simple Life Philosophy. This is a channel dedicated to looking at a philosophy of living life that's simple, that's minimalistic, maybe a little stoic, and discovering your own personal philosophy for yourself rather than just kind of falling into it. Uh, yes, I did change the name of the channel, but I'll go into that in more detail probably tomorrow. But today I want to talk about, because it is National Only Child Day, I do want to talk about that because yours truly is an only child. Um, a lot of people think like only children, we get the typical stereotypical, oh, you're spoiled, you always got your own stuff, it must have been so awesome not to have any kids with you. I used to get asked, don't you wish you ever have siblings? And much like many other only children, I responded, well, maybe, yeah, I suppose so, but I just never really thought about it because I just never had any kids, any siblings around that really did anything. And so, I have a friend I consider my brother, but he kind of adopted me, so, and we've known each other since we were little kids. So, it's like, okay, I can take an adopted brother, and I have an adopted sister. It's his sister, so it's like, okay, we're cool. But that's not the same thing, because a lot of people look at only children. It was amazing how Only Child Day came about because Siblings Day became a national holiday, and to celebrate brothers and sisters and whatever. And then somebody said, well, what about kids who don't have any siblings? It's kind of unfair to them. And so National Only Child Day came about for April 12th, and it's celebrated by only children around the country. Um, and I'm one of them. So I was looking through the National Only Child Day on Facebook thing, and they were this year. Usually they post like pictures of famous celebrities that are only children, and there's several. Most people don't realize they're only children, but I love these people, but you never see them with their siblings because they don't have any. But this year they were posting articles from various newspapers, magazines, whatever, online sources that talk about what it's like to be an only child, and dispelling some of the mythology like they're spoiled or whatever. That's not true. My parents went through economic downturns, and I suffered with those downturns. I was never allowed. It's actually kind of unfair, actually, in some respects, because I think when you have siblings, and this is me conjecture because I don't know, like when you're growing up and have siblings, you can always blame one of the other siblings. You don't have that option. If something goes disaster and you're the only one around, they know who did it. Okay, so it was, the closest thing I had to a sibling was my dog. So, and you can't blame everything on the dog. It just doesn't work. So that, I don't know, that stereotype doesn't always work because it really depends on your parents. Because if your parents are determined not to spoil you, you won't be spoiled. I mean, I had to work for a lot of things. My dad said, well, if you want that, you better get a job. Here, In the end, they, I worked a paper route. Uh, I thought it was hilarious, but I learned a lot from having a paper route, and I continue to have a paper route well into high school. I think I kind of dropped it when I was in ninth grade or whatever because I just, it was just taking up a lot of time. But I learned a lot about hard work, and I learned a lot about things from my father that typical quote unquote spoiled kid wouldn't have learned. And my dad was the greatest. But that kind of leads into the real peril of being an only child, and the one thing that people don't really think about because it's not something we like to think about. I grew up with my two parents, and hell, we were known as the Three Musketeers when I was growing up. It was just something that I kind of put in my head. And, Dad was Porthos because he was always the one that loved life, and Mom was kind of the religious one. And a lot of people think it's me that's the religious one. No, I'm more Athos. I'm more the crown. I'm more the brooding, the brooding love lost kind of guy, and that's actually fits me far better than Aramis. And Aramis was my mother, And we just lived that way. And I remember when Dad died, I had this real distinct feeling that Porthos had gone out of our life, and the fun-loving part of my life seemed to kind of end. That was my first real major depression bout. And this is the peril of being an only child. Who do you talk to about that understands that completely? I had to talk to Mom, but Mom was facing it as somebody who had lost a spouse, and that's a very different thing than somebody when you lose your father or your mother. So the only people that really understand how an only child feels when their parents die is them. And you can talk to other only children about it, and that's the closest you're going to get. When you watch your parents, this has really been, my dad never really went to the stage where he was helpless. He just, one day he was there, living life, and the next day he was gone. And probably a heart attack is what a lot of people believe. And then my mother now, it's been kind of hard because I sit there and I watch her slowly but surely, decay and fade away. She's still sharp as a tack, but her body is giving out on her. Okay, and it's like that's not my mom. I'm starting to feel like it's not my mother, because my mother was a very active woman. She gardened. She did a lot of things. She's very much more sociable than I was, and it's kind of gotten to a point where it's kind of sad for me every time I see her. I mean, I'm happy to have my mom around. I don't want her going anywhere anytime soon. But it's like there's a part of me that's like, man, this is hard. Who do I talk to about this? I'm envious of my ex-wife, even though she's kind of shouldered the burden of her parents compared to her siblings. But at least she can yell at her siblings, help me out. I can't do that. Okay, I don't have that option. And this is kind of the dark side of being an only child is dealing with your parents, because you're constantly realizing, God, I don't have anybody that gives a shit like I do about my parents. Okay, and that's kind of one of those hard things that you have to deal with as an only child. A lot of people could say, well, your parents didn't have to save up much money for them. My mom and dad refused to save money for me for college, and there's all these things. I remember when my dad died, my mother insisted, she says, I need, the money to pay off the house and stuff. And I said, you're going to have to purchase your dad's funeral. And I remember burying my father and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is expensive, and if I had had siblings, we could have shared the burden, but I ended up, paying for that myself, which is too bad because, the money I inherited from father would have been paid off all my student loans at the time, like all of them. And I ended up paying off one, and then not so much the rest. And I think that's the scary part for me of being an only child. I just don't see it as a benefit sometimes. Now, other times I think it's great, but I just don't have a concept of what it's like to have siblings. And now I begin to put a lot of things together too for myself as I put together my personal philosophy and continue to work on it. Part of my philosophy was very much influenced by the fact that my parents had all the time in the world, if I had a question, to stop and answer me. Maybe in that particular case, I'm spoiled. I didn't have to compete with my siblings for my parents' attention. Although my parents often got distracted by things in life and they were busy. Both of them were career, my mom became a career person in the hospital. My dad, worked second shift a lot. So he was gone in the afternoon and evening, and I'd see him on the weekends. Things like that. So, life took their attention sometimes. And I sometimes, found myself alone, which eventually I think kind of fed more into my introversion. If I truly am autistic, then I'm neurologically wired a little bit different than everybody else, and so that feeds into that. So I think what I really want people to understand today on National Only Child Day is that it's not all it's cracked up to be. it's got its own pitfalls. I get that having siblings can be a pain in the ass, but at least when you're standing over the grave of your parents, you have somebody to hug that understands what you're going through. I didn't have that. I didn't have that. And when you face that kind of thing alone, yeah, it can have a real deep and meaningful effect on you. Thanks for stopping by and listening to me pontificate about the perils of being an only child. And I'll talk more tomorrow about the name change of the channel and where I'm headed in a little bit of the direction that this channel's going. But today I wanted to this is important to me to talk about National Only Child Day and what it means to be an only child and one of the big perils of being an only child. So thank you for stopping by and listening, and like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Share this channel with your friends. Make sure you hit your notification bell so you get every video as it's uploaded. If this is your kind of content where you're searching for your own personal philosophy going through life, I can share that journey with you. Once again, this is Simple Life Philosophy, and I'm your host, Ed Raby, and I just want to thank you for stopping by, and you have a great day.